Hello friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Kraven the Hunter in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Kraven the Hunter. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you, I'm also going to give you all the information on which OTT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we'll talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about theory story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storylines, Starcaster's performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So start the video. Kraven the Hunter is a 2024 American superhero film featuring the Marvel Comics character of the same name. Directed by J.C. Chandor from a screenplay by Richard Wenk, Art Markham, and Matt Holloway, the film stars Aaron Taylor Johnson as Kraven the Hunter, alongside Ariana DeBose, Fred Hechinger, Alessandro Nivola, Christopher Abbott, and Russell Crowe. Produced by Columbia Pictures in association with Marvel Entertainment, it is the sixth film in Sony's Spider-Man universe, SSU. The film explores Kraven's relationship with his father and his path to becoming the greatest hunter. Kraven was considered for film appearances several times before Sony Pictures became interested in a standalone film for the character as part of its new shared universe in 2017. Wenk was hired in August 2018, with Markham and Holloway joining later. Chandor entered negotiations to direct in August 2020 and was confirmed in May 2021 when Taylor Johnson was cast. Additional cast members joined in early 2022 before filming took place from late March until mid-June in London, Iceland, and Glasgow. Following 2 years of delays, Kraven the Hunter was released by Sony Pictures, releasing in the United States on December 13, 2024. The film has grossed $30.2 million worldwide on a budget of $110 to $130 million and received negative reviews from critics. Plot: following the death of his mother, Sergei Kravinov, and his half-brother Dmitry Smerdyakov are taken by their father Nikolai to prepare to take over his drug trafficking operations. During a hunting trip in Ghana, Sergei is mortally wounded, protecting his brother from a lion. Near death, he is found by a girl named Calypso, who, having been forewarned by her grandmother that she would intervene in an accident and empower its victim, heals him with a serum and calls for rescue, leaving a tarot card behind. When Nikolai reveals he killed the lion to teach his sons a lesson, Sergei, having discovered his physical attributes have become animalistic, becomes sickened and disgusted by his father's actions, and flees to a sanctuary his mother owned in Russia. 16 years later, Sergei, now going by Kraven, is a vigilante who hunts criminals. After killing an arms trafficker in a Russian prison, Kraven travels to London for Dmitry's birthday. Unable to sleep that night, he goes for a walk, leading Dmitry to be captured by mercenaries. When Nikolai refuses to pay the ransom, Kraven tracks down Calypso, now working as a lawyer, and convinces her to help. Meanwhile, Dmitry is met by his kidnapper's boss, Alexei Sitsevich, who took part in an experiment granting him the strength and visage of a rhinoceros, proposing an alliance to overthrow Nikolai. Discovering Kraven's connection to Dmitry, Alexei lures him to a monastery in Turkey, but Kraven survives the ambush. He is then approached by the Foreigner, an assassin who uses ocular hypnosis to disorient his targets, with an offer to kill Kraven. Tracking Kraven and Calypso to his sanctuary and using Dmitry as bait, Alexei and the Foreigner ambush Kraven. Drugging him with neurotoxin, the Foreigner attacks Kraven, but Calypso kills him with a crossbow and revives Kraven. He then uses a buffalo stampede to trap Alexei, who, despite turning into the rhino and briefly overpowering Kraven, is killed. Discerning that Nikolai was the one who revealed his existence to Alexei, Kraven tracks his father for answers. Nikolai reveals that he knew Alexei was targeting him and manipulated his sons to remove him. Kraven steals ammunition so that his father will be killed by a bear. 1 year later, having gained shape-shifting abilities from the doctor who experimented on Alexei, Dmitry discovers this and disowns Kraven, stating that despite his claims of being morally superior, He and Nikolai were the same, hunters searching for their next great trophy. At home, Kraven discovers a note from Nikolai, along with a vest made from the skin of the killed lion from long ago, which he puts on. Cast Aaron Taylor Johnson as Sergei Kravenov, a hunter-gatherer. Taylor Johnson described his take on the character as an apex predator and a conservationist but not a poacher, a protector of the natural world, and an animal lover. Levi Miller portrays a young Sergei. Ariana DeBose as Calypso Ezili, a voodoo priestess and Kraven's love interest. Diana Babnikova plays young Calypso. Fred Hechinger as Dmitry Kravenov, Chameleon, Kraven's estranged half-brother who is a master of disguise. Billy Barat portrays a young Dmitry. Alessandro Nivola as Alexei Sitsevich Rhino, a Russian mercenary who can transform into a human-rhino hybrid by injecting himself with doses of an experimental serum. Christopher Abbott as the Foreigner, an assassin hired by Alexei. Russell Crowe as Nikolai Kravenov, Kraven's estranged father and a ruthless crime lord and drug trafficker. Murat Seven as Omer Aksoy, a Turkish assassin hired by Alexei. Yuri Kolokolnikov as Simon Chorny, a Russian crime lord Kraven encounters in prison. Additionally, Masha Vasyukova appears as Kraven's mother. Murat Seven plays Omer Ozdemir, an associate of Alexei's who kidnaps Dmitry. Production, development. Director Sam Raimi planned to include the Marvel Comics character Kraven the Hunter in his fourth Spider-Man film, before that project was canceled in favor of The Amazing Spider-Man, 2012, a reboot of the franchise. Sony Pictures announced plans in December 2013 for The Amazing Spider-Man 2, 2014 to establish a shared universe, inspired by the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU, based on the Marvel properties they held the rights to. Kraven was teased in that film, with its director Mark Webb expressing interest in seeing the character appear on film. In February 2015, Sony and Marvel Studios announced a new partnership to co-produce the film Spider-Man: Homecoming 2017 and integrate the Spider-Man character with Marvel's MCU. In May 2017, Sony announced its own shared universe, later named Sony's Spider-Man universe. Sony intended this to be adjunct to their MCU Spider-Man films, featuring Spider-Man-related properties, beginning with Venom 2018. The studio was considering a Kraven film for the universe. Before learning that Sony had the film rights for Kraven, director Ryan Coogler hoped to include the character in his MCU film Black Panther 2018 because of a fight between Black Panther and Kraven in Christopher Priest's Black Panther comic book run. Richard Wenk was hired to write a screenplay for Kraven the Hunter in August 2018, a month after the successful release of Sony's The Equalizer 2, 2018, which he wrote. The project was billed as the next chapter of Sony's shared universe. Wenk was tasked with introducing Kraven to audiences and figuring out which character he could hunt in the film, since Spider-Man, considered to be Kraven's white whale in the comic books, was unlikely to appear due to the MCU deal. Whether the film would target adult audiences would depend on the audience response to Venom's darker approach. In October, Wenk said he was cracking the story and tone of the film before beginning scripting. He intended to adhere to the character's comic book lore, including by featuring Kraven fighting Spider-Man. Wenk said Sony intended to adapt the Kraven's Last Hunt comic book storyline, and there were ongoing discussions over whether to do that in this film or a later one. Wenk compared the latter approach to the two-part film Kill Bill, 2003-2004. He expressed interest in having Equalizer director Antoine Fuqua join the film. Fuqua considered directing Sony's Marvel-based film Morbius, 2022, and would decide on directing Kraven based on the script. Sony confirmed that a film featuring Kraven was in development in March 2019. John Watts, the director of Homecoming and its sequel Spider-Man: Far From Home, 2019, expressed interest in featuring Kraven in a potential third Spider-Man film set within the MCU. Watts pitched a film pitting Peter Parker's Spider-Man against Kraven to Spider-Man star Tom Holland, but this idea was abandoned in favor of the story of Spider-Man: No Way Home, 2021. By August 2020, Art Markham and Matt Holloway had rewritten the script after doing uncredited rewrites for Morbius. At that time, J.C. Chandor entered talks to direct the film, while Matt Tolmach, Arad, and David Haushalter were set as producers. Chandor was confirmed as director in May 2021, when Aaron Taylor Johnson was cast to star as Kraven and signed on to portray the character in multiple films. Sony had previously approached actors such as Brad Pitt, Keanu Reeves, John David Washington, and Adam Driver for the role, but Sony executives moved quickly to cast Taylor Johnson after they were blown away by early footage of him in the film Bullet Train 2022. Taylor Johnson began negotiations shortly after an initial phone call with Chandor and Tolmach. By July, Jodie Turner-Smith was reportedly in talks to portray Kraven's love interest, Calypso, that October. Holland said he and Pascal had discussed him potentially reprising his role as Spider-Man in the film. The film was greenlit with a production budget of $90 million, but due to the 2023 writers and actors strike, the costs increased. The final cost was reportedly as high $130 million, but Variety disputed this figure, estimating it cost upward of $110 million. Pre-production: Russell Crowe was cast in an undisclosed role in early February 2022. The Hollywood Reporter noted that many of the main characters in the film would be members of Kraven's family, with Crowe potentially portraying Kraven's father. By then, Cody Smith-McPhee had been offered the role of Chameleon, Kraven's half-brother, but declined due to a scheduling conflict. Turner-Smith was also confirmed to have not been cast as Calypso. Later in February, Fred Hechinger joined the cast, reportedly as Chameleon. In March, Ariana DeBose joined the cast, reportedly in the Calypso role. Alessandro Nivola was cast as a villain, and Christopher Abbott was cast as the film's main villain, which was reported to be the Foreigner. Nivola said he joined the film to work with Chandor again after a most violent year, 2014. Taylor Johnson was preparing for stunt training with Chandor in England, just outside of London, for the following couple of weeks. Filming occurred in Iceland in early February 2022 at Lake Mývatn, using the working title Safari. True North Productions handled the production services, with an 80-person crew involved in the shooting over 2 days. Principal photography began on March 20, 2022, in London, England, under the working title Spiral. Ben Davis served as cinematographer after doing so for several MCU films. Better source needed. Levi Miller joined the cast in April, 56, and DeBose confirmed that she was portraying Calypso in the film a month later, when she had already been filming in London. In mid-June, Taylor Johnson revealed that he had wrapped filming and stated that the film was shot entirely on location, which he said add something really beautiful to the personal story, and called it important for the authenticity of the character. Nivola also wrapped filming at that time, and said the character's physical abilities in the film were grounded in reality, while Chandor described it as depicting the most incredible Olympic athlete you've ever seen. Filming also took place in Glasgow, Scotland. Post-production: in August 2022, Nivola revealed that the film would include a time jump and that his character would physically transform in the third act, for which he did not use any visual effects. He described it as a classic villain role with complex psychology and personal history to draw on. The following month, Hechinger confirmed that he was portraying Dmitry Smerdyakov, Chameleon. Later in September, the film's release date was delayed to October 6, 2023, from January 13, 2023. In April 2023, Crowe and Nivola were confirmed to be respectively portraying Kraven's father and the character Rhino. Taylor Johnson confirmed that the film would receive an R rating by the Motion Picture Association, the first SSU film and the first Spider-Man-related project overall to do so. In July, the film's release date was delayed to August 30, 2024, due to the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike. In August 2023, the film's final writing credits were given. Wenk received sole credit for the story and shared credit for the screenplay with Markham and Holloway, while off-screen additional literary credit was given to Donnie Cates, Chris Bremner, Chandor, Adama Ebo, Adan Ebo, Zach Olkowitz, and Oren Uziel. In April 2024, the film's release date was further delayed to December 13, 2024, to avoid competition from other franchise films releasing around the prior August date. Tolmach also attributed the release delay as a strategic reflection of Sony's excitement for the film. Chandor felt that the delays allowed him to sharpen the characters and tighten the plot, deeming the reshoot strategic and effective. Despite the disastrous underperformance of Madame Web 2024, Sony felt optimistic that Kraven the Hunter would be more in line with the Venom films, with Chandor opining that the film would surprise the audience once it releases. Craig Wood serves as the film's editor. Music, main article, Kraven the Hunter, soundtrack. Benjamin Wallfish was hired in June 2023 to compose the score for the film. Marketing. Sony debuted the first footage from the film in a show reel of the studio's upcoming films at CinemaCon in April 2022. The first trailer was showcased during Sony's panel at CinemaCon in April 2023. On June 19, 2023, the trailer leaked online and was subsequently followed by the official poster and a red band trailer the same day. The second trailer was released on August 14, 2024, featuring the song The Man Comes Around, 2002, by Johnny Cash. Ellis Schaefer of Variety said Kraven shows no mercy in the trailer with his gruesome methods, feeling it transforms Kraven from your average hitman into the fur-wearing baddie the character is known as in the comics. In November, a commercial aired during the 2024 NFL season featuring members of the Baltimore Ravens, particularly kicker Justin Tucker, who suggested renaming the team the Baltimore Kravens. Sony Pictures released the first 8 minutes of the film on its YouTube channel on December 2nd. Bradley Russell at Total Film felt releasing the footage for free a week ahead of the film's release was a surprise, but also believed it was a bold tactic that might just sell audiences to watch the film. Release. Kraven the Hunter was theatrically released in the United States on December 13, 2024, in IMAX and Premium Large Formats (PLFs). It was previously scheduled for release on January 13, 2023, October 6, 2023, 58, and August 30, 2024. Reception. Box office. As of December 20, 2024, Kraven the Hunter has grossed $15.2 million in the United States and Canada and $15 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $30.2 million. In the United States and Canada, Kraven the Hunter was released alongside The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, and was projected to gross $13 to $15 million from 3,211 theaters in its opening weekend. The film made $4.7 million on its first day and went on to debut to $11 million, finishing third behind holdovers Moana 2 and Wicked. Critical response. The film received overwhelmingly negative reviews from critics. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 15% of 132 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 3.9/10. The website's consensus reads, claiming no trophies with its rote story and shoddy special effects, Kraven the Hunter turns out to be a paper tiger. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 35 out of 100, based on 40 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of C on an A+ to F scale, while those polled by PostTrack gave it a 59% overall positive score. Livy Scott of Inverse wrote, "A clunky, crowded script, muddy visual effects, and glaringly obvious ADR bogged down a promising premise. It's not camp enough to become a cult classic, and it lacks the conviction to carry its most ambitious ideas to the finish line." The Daily Telegraph's Tim Roby gave it 1 out of 5 stars, writing, "Last orders can't come soon enough for the whole parade of supervillains, superheroes, or however they're now choosing to identify. This is rock bottom." Ian Freer of Empire gave it 2 out of 5 stars, writing, "This all feels a long way from Chandor's glory days of Margin Call and All Is Lost. Save the occasional flourish, Kraven the Hunter is limp, tired, uninvolving superhero fare." Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian also gave it 2 out of 5 stars, saying that Chandor does a serviceable job, but the delirious craziness that once made the superhero genre so watchable is not really in evidence. Kraven is a so-so character in a so-so film, and the superhero revival is as far away as ever. The AV Club's Jesse Hechinger gave the film a B grade, writing, "While all of the previous movies in this barely series seemed scrambled together in a panic, Chandor's movie seems scrambled together with a great deal of confidence and a bit of style. Adam Graham of the Detroit News said the film is far from the cream of the crop in the superhero space, but non-discerning comic book fans may appreciate the spoils of this bounty, and gave it a C+ grade. Future, Chandor was open to making a second and final film featuring the character based on Kraven's last hunt and setting Kraven against Spider-Man. It's obviously very tragic and sad, but the character we're trying to create is one who could realistically, if this film is a success, end with Last Hunt. Similarly, Taylor Johnson expressed interest in a Sinister Six crossover film. In December 2024, following the film's projected financial failure, it was reported that Kraven would be the final film in Sony's Spider-Man universe, ending any chance for a sequel or crossover, with a later report from Variety specifically clarifying Kraven to be the last non-Venom film in the franchise. Towards the end of Sony Pictures' newest Marvel movie, Kraven the Hunter, the titular anti-hero, played with maximum abdominal musculature by Aaron Taylor Johnson, experiences a chilling hallucination in which he's surrounded by a horde of spiders. It is a clear allusion to the character's greatest nemesis in the Marvel comics, Spider-Man. It is also almost certainly the closest the character, or at least Taylor Johnson's version of him, will ever get to confronting the web-slinger. Kraven is projected to take in one of the lowest ever opening weekends for a Marvel superhero film, making it the third of Sony Pictures' unsuccessful attempts to spin off a secondary Spider-Man character into its own movie franchise, following 2022's Morbius with Jared Leto and last February's Madam Web with Dakota Johnson. The looming box office failure almost certainly signifies the end of this endeavor at the studio, which one knowledgeable insider at Sony imputed to an industry-wide, irrational exuberance about superheroes that has ultimately led to the overall diminishment of the genre's primacy as the leading force at the box office. For one thing, technically speaking, there never really was a Sony Marvel universe, or a Sony Spider-Man universe, or any other official designation akin to the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the newly relaunched DC Universe. Sony has never approached its comic book adaptations with that level of intentional narrative cohesion, as exemplified by the studio's casual, lower-cased, and rhetorically ungainly phrasing for its superhero films, Sony's universe of Marvel characters. For another, Sony remains deeply invested in making movies about Spider-Man, the beloved Marvel character who launched the current era of superhero cinema with 2002's Spider-Man. The fourth Spider-Man film starring Tom Holland is expected to start filming in 2025, in partnership with Marvel Studios. More on this later. The animated Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse is in production and will conclude the Oscar-winning trilogy focusing on Miles Morales, and Sony is producing a live-action Spider-Man noir series starring Nicolas Cage for Amazon Prime Video. Sony insiders also fiercely defend the success of the 3 Venom films starring Tom Hardy, which have earned more than $1.8 billion worldwide. The latest film, Venom: The Last Dance, has earned the lowest grosses yet for the franchise, $473 million, especially against the $856 million global take for 2018's Venom. But The Last Dance cost $120 million, thrifty for a superhero movie, and it improved on the international grosses of 2021's Venom: Let There Be Carnage. So there's really no financial reason for Sony to stop making Venom movies anytime soon. But Venom, built around a widely popular character with its own distinct imprint on the culture, also presented Sony with the false impression that audiences would flock to see a movie about any Spider-Man character without Spider-Man in the film. All of these characters are famous because they went up against Spider-Man, says exhibitor relations analyst Jeff Bach. Unfortunately for Sony, they had a taste of success with Venom, and that kind of spoiled everything for them, because they thought they could just spin off all of these characters. I don't think they realized that Venom could carry a franchise, whereas these other characters could not. To not have Spider-Man in these films was the fatal flaw. Sony is far from alone in aggressively expanding its superhero portfolio at the end of the 2010s, only to weather a sharp decline both in quality and audience interest in the 2020s. But the studio was caught in a unique catch-22 of its own making. The unprecedented deal between the studio and Disney's Marvel Studios to share Spider-Man within the MCU, starting with 2016's Captain America: Civil War and 2017's Spider-Man: Homecoming. The partnership, in which Marvel Studios chief Kevin Feige and former Sony Pictures chief Amy Pascal produced the Tom Holland-led Spidey films for Sony Pictures, has been fabulously lucrative for Sony, with worldwide grosses topping $3.9 billion. But it also siloed off Holland's Peter Parker from any Sony projects that aren't officially part of the MCU. The corporate entanglements when studios try to work together are really hard, says one top executive with extensive experience in the superhero space. Sony has no flexibility. They have a cage that they have to work in, and they're just trying to make one good movie at a time. According to one Sony source, the deal with Disney never precluded Sony from using Spider-Man in its movies that didn't bear his name. The Spider-Verse movie's profusion of Peter Parkers, Gwen Stacy's, and other various Spider-People certainly bears that out. But there was a feeling within the studio that audiences would not accept Holland's Spidey suddenly popping up in a live-action film that wasn't a part of the MCU, especially after Spider-Man: No Way Home, and the Marvel Studios projects Loki and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness established definitive boundaries to the Marvel multiverse. This seems to have had the greatest impact on Morbius, which was originally scheduled to premiere in July 2020, well before No Way Home and Doctor Strange 2, but due to the pandemic wound up opening after them. The delay forced Sony into reshoots to account for how Michael Keaton's Adrian Toomes, introduced as part of the MCU in Homecoming, could be standing in the same room as Leto's titular living vampire, a character who isn't in the MCU. A fun conceit that didn't seem like a big deal until the multiverse suddenly made it one. Dancing around Spider-Man without ever getting to use him also contributed to the feeling that these spin-off films were merely exercises in, Kraven opportunism. You can feel the cynicism a mile away, says a veteran producer. They're grinding out product, and it feels like it. There's no quality control. Privately, Sony insiders acknowledge that Kraven, Madam Web, and Morbius are creative and critical duds, even if they also insist that Morbius, which made $167.4 million globally, did turn a profit. Moving forward, they say, the studio will need to be more discerning about which, if any, of the studio's stable of Spider-Man characters should be elevated into their own movie franchise. There is a different possibility as well. You could hire a different Spider-Man, Bach says. It doesn't have to be Tom. Continuing a strange SSU trend, there's a huge difference between critics' and audiences' reactions to 2024's Kraven the Hunter. Kraven the Hunter premiered on December 13, 2024, as part of Sony's Spider-Man universe, not set in the world of Marvel Studios' MCU, and immediately seemed to follow in the footsteps of the SSU's biggest disappointments, Morbius and Madam Web. Kraven the Hunter may mark the end for the SSU as audiences know it, but some have suggested the Aaron Taylor Johnson-led movie isn't as underwhelming as first thought. Built on brawn, J.C. Chandor's action sci-fi picture Kraven the Hunter is limited by incomprehensible plotting and dodgy one-liners delivered by a cast who seem to be practicing their worst Russian accents. If not for the bevy of anticlimactic fights, Kraven the Hunter could be so bad it's good. Instead, it's merely another excursion away from the Marvel Cinematic Universe to Sony's series of defanged comic book villains. Kraven's baffling origin story finds a jumbled through-line in half-brothers Sergei and Dmitri's tight-knit relationship. Sons of Russian drug dealer Nikolai Kravenov, Russell Crowe, adopting a low, growling accent, the boys are persistently pushed by their bloodthirsty father to be stronger than Sergei's mother, who recently died by suicide. To harden them, Nikolai takes them hunting in Ghana. Shoot to kill. Fun, Nikolai grumbles. Fun for Sergei is short-lived when a lion mauls him. Only a potion provided by a passerby named Calypso saves Sergei, imbuing him with otherworldly vision, agility, and strength. Fast forward 16 years, and a hulking Sergei, Aaron Taylor Johnson, is now a vigilante known as Kraven the Hunter, who's pursuing criminals that remind him of his estranged father. Alexei Sitsevich, Alessandro Nivola, a Russian mercenary who can morph into a rhino, is not only worried that Kraven will soon pursue him. Alexei also wants to eliminate his rival Nikolai. Alexei kidnaps Dmitri and dispatches a time-morphing assassin called the Foreigner, Christopher Abbott, to pursue Kraven. With an adult Calypso, Ariana DeBose, providing aid, Kraven tries to free Dmitri. Thankfully, Kraven the Hunter doesn't take itself too seriously. Like Sony's The Venom franchise and Madame Web, the story is incidental to these larger-than-life characters. While Taylor Johnson does his best Hugh Jackman impression, posing for glamour shots of his ripped body before crawling and flying across the frame, only a couple of actors here know exactly what movie they're in. Abbott is captivatingly slippery, rolling his slender frame and casting his bewitching eyes on his victims with cool intent. Nivola, on the other hand, is the type of ham you'd find in Joel Schumacher's Batman films. From his surprising hissing to his stocky build, every choice he makes is spontaneous yet wholly grounded in this troubled character. If the action in Kraven the Hunter was as well conceived as its villains, it'd be a riot. Unfortunately, the brawls are physically detached from the environment. The choreography lacks punch and design. The compositions are spatially unaware. Kraven and Alexei's final tussle, an anticlimactic mud fight in the middle of a field, ends as quickly as it began. The film adds a pound of revenge and an ounce of a surprise to its final moments. But these ingredients, including the entertaining silliness, aren't enough for Kraven the Hunter to catch the biggest game, our admiration. There's a saying among filmmakers about comedy movies: you can't keep them on the shelf for long, or else they'll go stale. The same is equally true about superhero films, and it's a fate that Sony's Kraven the Hunter suffered this weekend, becoming the lowest opening in the studio's Marvel canon with $11 million 3-day total. The bomb is the third strike for Sony Marvel following 2022's Morbius, $73.8 million, and this year's Madame Web, $43.8. These are films made strictly by the Sony brass without the nuance of Lord and Miller, who steer their Spider-Verse animated movies, and Marvel Cinematic Universe boss Kevin Feige and Amy Pascal, who shepherd their Tom Holland starring MCU movies. Combined, the Holland and Spider-Verse titles have grossed $6.85 billion worldwide. Sony has owned the Spider-Man and Friends portion of the Marvel library separate from Disney's Marvel Cinematic Universe since 1999. Recently, we heard about Madame Web's set of problems. Last-minute cuts of 20 to 30 pages before production started, sending the filmmakers into a quandary, a first-time feature film director in S.J. Clarkson, and lackluster dailies that weren't corrected down the road by the producers. Let's also not forget how Sony didn't double down in selling the movie on its newfound Anyone But You box office star, Sydney Sweeney. Kraven the Hunter was developed in 2018 when half-assed superhero movies could do no wrong. Sony got away with making a fan-appreciated though critically disdained Venom franchise, which is netting the studio some $400 million in profit off a combined $1.8 billion in global grosses. Chandor, who previously directed the Mark Bowl co-scripted Triple Frontier for Netflix, became attached during COVID in August 2020. He was attracted by the prospects of making a grounded gangster film. Nocturnal Animals Golden Globe winner Taylor Johnson signed on to the title role in May 2021. The $1.95 billion grossing phenomenal success of Sony and Marvel Cinematic Universe's Spider-Man No Way Home 3 years ago only cemented the Culver City lot's belief that superhero movies were invincible, until myriad low points followed, indicating that fanboys would no longer accept cookie-cutter titles like Sony's Morbius in the spring of 2022. 73.8 million domestic box office, 167.4 worldwide. MCU's sequel The Marvels in No 23, 84.5 million, and previous dud Madam Web, $43.8 million, funded. Further complicating Sony's expansion of the Spider-Man universe is that Sony can't use Tom Holland's live-action MCU character willy-nilly. It received a clearance to have the web-slinger make a cameo at the end of 2021's Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Sony originally dated Kraven the Hunter for MLK Weekend 2023 before moving it to October 6, 2023. The initial footage and announcement that the title would be the first R-rated Spidey Universe movie was announced at CinemaCon that year. The first trailer dropped June 16th. As the strike got underway in July, Sony pushed Kraven the Hunter more than a year to Labor Day weekend 2024. Scared by the heat around Beetlejuice in the post-Labor Day corridor, Sony shifted Kraven the Hunter to the prized pre-holiday mid-December frame, where it launched Jumanji: The Next Level, 59.2 members, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, 35.3 to great success. Rival motion picture marketing execs believe that Kraven the Hunter would have fared better as a 4-day launch in order to collect the most money possible. It's all about the first weekend with superhero movies before they drop like a rock in weekend 2. Despite the Christmas holiday's history for a 5x plus multiple on releases, Kraven the Hunter will have a hard time holding screens against Disney's Mufasa, Paramount's Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and still powerful Thanksgiving tentpoles Wicked and Moana 2. It doesn't matter that it's the only R-rated fanboy movie on the marquee. The pick has limited word of mouth in its C Cinema score. Social media analytics corp Relish Mix noticed zero heat around the Sony Marvel title before its opening, with 278.9 million followers across TikTok, Facebook, X, YouTube, and Instagram combined. That paled in comparison to the social media universe of bombs like The Marvels, 599 M followers, and Madam Web, 424 M followers. In regards to the poor word of mouth on Kraven the Hunter that Relish Mix noticed, many viewers are unassuaged in their apprehension to taking a C-list comic book character and giving him his own movie. Comments include, "He's a super villain. Why does Sony want to make Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery gush?" And "Here comes Sony's annual expletive of Spider-Man Universe movie without Spider-Man." Others were turned off by the CGI. Looked interesting until that tiger whatever part. Expectation changed from cool to silly pretty fast, and looks like the rhino didn't finish rendering. Sony tells Deadline that they didn't cut back on their P&A spend for Kraven the Hunter heading into the weekend. However, we've heard from others close to the film that the studio opted not to air some pre-booked TV spots. When it comes to being financially responsible, Sony isn't stupid, and it will not throw good money after bad. Seeing the storm, Sony scaled back its skin on Kraven the Hunter from 75% to 50%, with TSG upping its share. Sony has an option twice a year for TSG to bump up its stakes on movies. Sony isn't turning its back on Chandor, having had a great experience working with the filmmaker. As Deadline told you first, Sony is back in business with Chandor, with the director helming an untitled contemporary drama thriller centering around the polemics of capitalism, with the story involving an investigation into a death in a moneyed dynastic family. I don't like Kraven the Hunter. No, I'm not talking about Sony's latest Marvel spin-off or the film's main character that Aaron Taylor Johnson plays, all in due time. I'm talking about the original character from Marvel Comics. While not the worst foe in Spider-Man's prestigious rogues gallery, Kraven is also far from the best. You've seen a character like him 1,000 times before, an aloof hunter who has grown tired of hunting regular prey, so he decides to go full, most dangerous game and hunt Spider-Man of all people. Some would argue that making a Kraven movie without Spider-Man is as silly as making a Venom movie without Spider-Man, but that's the world we live. Still, I'd argue that the former is a tired concept, with or without our favorite web-slinger. I'd personally much rather see Spidey face an interesting villain like the dangerously deranged Green Goblin or the brilliantly maniacal Dr. Octopus instead of some one-note Russian guy who hunts things for the sake of it. That's not the only reason Sony's latest and possibly final attempt to craft a Spider-Man villain spin-off without Spider-Man, Kraven the Hunter, is fighting an uphill battle. While Kraven is a bit more of a recognizable character than Morbius and Madam Web, he's still a far cry from the massively popular Venom. Not to mention, just mere hours before my screening of Kraven the Hunter, reports began circulating that Sony is allegedly pulling the plug on their Spidey villain spin-offs altogether. After Kraven the Hunter, it's abundantly clear as to why that is, as this is yet another Spider-Man villain spin-off that is narratively empty, technically baffling, and above all else, fundamentally misinterpreting the characters it's adapting. Then there's Alessandro Nivola as Rhino, who might just be the most over-the-top villain in a Marvel movie since Colin Farrell as Bullseye in Daredevil. Much like the majestic mammal he's named after grazes grass on the savannah, Nivola is gleefully chewing up the scenery every time he appears on screen, with him constantly going off on bizarre, charismatic tangents and acting needlessly creepy around all his underlings. There's even a downright hysterical moment when Nivola, completely unprompted, makes what I can only describe as a sound, which probably sounds incredibly vague, but I genuinely don't know how to describe it beyond that. I don't think I can call the character or the performance good, but I will say that Nivola's performance as Rhino does bring some much-needed entertainment value, whether it's ironic or not. There's also another villain in the film with Christopher Abbott's The Foreigner, who is just all sorts of bizarre. Not only is this character just an odd choice to include, Seriously, dozens of Spider-Man villains to choose from, and this is who you went with. But they also have a superpower that practically makes them an overpowered, unbeatable god without any real explanation. If you're not decently familiar with the comics character who is somehow more obscure than Big Wheel, you'll be completely lost as to who this person is and how his powers work. In fact, basically, none of the superpowered characters of Kraven the Hunter ever get definitive answers to their out-of-nowhere abilities. Why does Kraven have the loose ability to talk to animals? Some potion did it. Why does Rhino turn into a rhino? Some off-screen doctor did it. Why does that one secret character have the ability to control time itself? It is anybody's guess, which gives you an idea of how barely decipherable Kraven the Hunter's plot is. By far the most apparent issue in Kraven the Hunter is how blindingly apparent the movie's delays and reshoots were. You thought Fant Forstick had some continuity errors? Or that Joss Whedon's Justice League wasn't consistent with the original vision? Kraven the Hunter might just be the new champion of an inconsistent blockbuster, as not even Spidey's webs can patch up a film edit that is falling apart at the seams. Kraven the Hunter is a representation of everything that's wrong with the term, "we'll fix it in post-production." A good percentage of the movie is character interactions on a green screen, or ADR for off-screen dialogue. At least, it's mostly off-screen, but sometimes we get treated to some of the worst dubbing I've ever seen in a major motion picture. I swear there was a moment or two where I could see the green hue of the green screen because it wasn't keyed properly. I suspect the constant tweaking of the film is also why Kraven the Hunter's much-publicized R rating feels like it was an afterthought. The majority of the film's few F-bombs come from off-screen ADR, and the blood and gore effects are almost entirely CGI. Apart from a brief but admittedly cool action scene in the third act that turns up the violence, I'd be very surprised if Kraven the Hunter was made with an R rating in mind from the start. Speaking of CGI, just about every digital effect in Kraven the Hunter is laughably unconvincing. All the animals look like cartoon characters, and the non-real animals don't fare much better. Even something as conceptually simple as gunshot wounds looks so incredibly fake that a mere tiny prosthetic would probably have been a better creative choice. It's been said before, and I'll say it again, who are these movies even for? Spider-Man fans won't like Kraven the Hunter because the film is almost completely detached from the comic books. Casual film fans won't like it either because, on a fundamental filmmaking level, Kraven the Hunter makes some elephant-sized missteps. Despite directly setting up a sequel, Kraven the Hunter doesn't even feature a single end credits scene, even though the scene from the trailer where Kraven is in a forest with his classic costume was almost certainly what the end credits scene was supposed to be, as it isn't in the film. That alone seems like a pretty clear indication that the shop is starting to close up. With a whopping 5 poorly critically received movies in a row, Kraven the Hunter really should have been the last attempt to right the ship. Instead, the film repeats the exact same mistakes that have been pointed out over and over again since the first Venom film. It's almost like a worst hits compilation of all those movies' mistakes, with the poorly conceived idea of Venom, the barely coherent story of Morbius, and the baffling technical problems of Madam Web. As he grows older, the boy becomes a muscular, bearded hunk with perfect abs, the type usually cast in shaving cream commercials. He also becomes a nature protector and a fighter for justice, of course. Not the villain from the comics, but just a heap of muscles directed towards good. When unknown assailants kidnap his wimpy brother Dmitri with the telling surname Smirdyakov, which better than any review characterizes this movie, Kraven the Hunter embarks on a path of war with powerful enemies. All you need to know about them. The first one can count to at least 2. The second one resembles Rocksteady on heavy drugs. Will Kraven manage to defeat these spawn of clearly unhealthy imagination, and most importantly, finally bury that unbearable Spider-Man universe? When you build a film around an action star, Jason Statham say, he'll do a lot of things that only happen in the movies. Lay waste to 5 goons with his bare hands in 2 minutes. Drive vehicles at dizzying speeds down the ancient staircases of a European metropolis. leap from balconies, and hang from the rudders of buzz-diving helicopters. When you think about it, he's a lot like a superhero, except that his actions are all, in theory, reality-based. The actor who doesn't steal scenes is Aaron Taylor Johnson. I'm always holding out for this dude because I liked him in Nocturnal Animals and Nowhere Boy and Savages, and for a while he seemed to have the makings of a star. Smooth good looks, air of erotic menace, elegant English authority. But despite the fact that he was recently falsely rumored to have won the role of James Bond, I'm starting to think that Taylor Johnson lacks the X factor. In Kraven the Hunter, he does a fine job when he has to go running through the streets of London and hang on to the side of a speeding van. But the American accent he puts on hurts him because it flattens his personality. There's an endless scene where Sergei is talking on a bench with Calypso, Ariana DeBose, the lawyer who's his corporate world partner, and Taylor Johnson gets buried under the expository dialogue. He should have figured out a way to spin it. Kraven the Hunter is kind of an origin story, with an extended boyhood flashback to Africa, where Calypso saved Sergei's life after he'd been mauled by a lion. Except that the Kraven we meet in the present day is already a hunter. He's got a list, full of names of bad guys, that he will hunt and kill. But who are they? Where did he get the list? It's all sort of vague. Why does the climactic duel take place amid a stampede of water buffalo? For no good reason. I've seen much worse comic book movies than Kraven the Hunter, but maybe the best way to sum up my feelings about the film is to confess that I didn't stay to see if there's a post-credits teaser. That's a dereliction of duty, but it's one I didn't commit on purpose. I simply hadn't bothered to think about it. Some years and a few premature notices have passed since Kraven the Hunter was first announced as Sony's next Spider-Man adjacent spin-off. The overstuffed and undercooked maxi production now joins two other DOA Spidey satellite picks, Madam Web and Venom: The Last Dance, neither of which performed well enough to warrant this much self-serious exposition and ham-handed thisping. Everybody in Kraven the Hunter is clearly trying, as director J.C. Chandor tried to establish in his heartfelt introduction to last night's New York premiere. There's still nothing on screen that suggests a clear understanding of the characters or why their stories had to be told other than the usual mindless urge to mine every last scrap of Marvel Comics' intellectual property. Everything feels simultaneously lifeless and desperate to please. From the computer-generated safari animals to the elaborate wirework and four-letter swears, but nothing has the spark of antic joy that you might want from a comic book movie about a shredded Russian assassin who has daddy issues and also fights colorful villains with names like the Rhino and the Foreigner. Sometimes the movie's committed, but aimless cast members tell jokes. Nothing really sticks here. Kraven the Hunter begins on a long, icy road to jail. The prisoners are let off the bus for 5 minutes to relieve themselves. A guard waddles after our anti-hero, Sergei the Hunter Kravinoff, Aaron Taylor Johnson, who makes his grand entrance while urinating. At least it looks like Sergei's peeing, even if the guard's dialogue suggests that he's actually looking around, hoping to escape. Sergei won't get far, we're told, because there are big, bland, computer-animated wolves loping about. He meets and dispatches those wolves right after he breaks out of prison. Much like the legendary but unaffiliated Pumamon, Taylor Johnson flies over rooftops and scales walls without grace or style. He takes his shirt off on a helicopter that flies him away to the next setup, then quips robotically to his getaway driver when she asks him how things went in jail. How they always go, Taylor Johnson croaks. Good for me, bad for them. You can't stay mad at Taylor Johnson for long, even if he does have the bum task of carrying a movie whilst delivering reams of articulate but unlovable dialogue like, "Hunting people down is sort of my thing." Some superpowered villains, led by the heavily accented egomaniac Alexei the Rhino Sitsevich, Alessandro Nivola, and the squirrely unnamed assassin the Foreigner, Christopher Abbott, pursue Kravinoff. He doesn't get far, nor does he appear to be in a hurry given his faith in his animal-style superpowers, which were gifted to him as a youth by his future girlfriend Calypso, Ariana DeBose, during a safari hunt with his overbearing big game hunter father Nikolai, Russell Crowe. Sergei also has a fawning brother, Dmitri, Fred Hechinger, who only pops up when Sergei's story needs some stakes or a basic sense of urgency. These characters usually tell us, at length, what they care about, followed by some monotonous, by-the-numbers computer-animated set pieces that show off everyone's superpowers. The foreigner can hypnotize and then gun down his opponents. Sitsevich has a weird medical condition that gives him rhino skin. Calypso has a voodoo-loving grandma, etc. Who was this R-rated 127-minute-long slog made for? Obligatory quips, unusually long takes, joyless profanity, and unconvincing bloodletting don't do much to set the tone, possibly because the rest of the movie isn't sensibly designed for anyone but pre-sold comic book movie fanboys. Nivola outshines the rest simply by committing to overblown character actor tics. Crow also seems to understand his assignment. Both men seem to hail from a different movie than the one Taylor Johnson is acting in. He stalks two armed heavies up a staircase, ducking behind them like Harpo Marx when they inevitably turn to check what's over their shoulders. It's Sergei. He then drops on all fours to assert dominance, like Sharon Stone in Catwoman. This is soon after Kraven bites off another heavy's nose and then spits it out at another baddie in a hail of tacky-looking computer graphics. At least Batman Returns made a similarly jarring effect worth gasping at. For better, and mostly worse, Kraven the Hunter definitely feels like one of Sony's Marvel movies. Given the otherwise numbing wealth of dramatic shorthand, you'll spot and maybe even cling to eccentric grace notes and flourishes throughout. Hacky cliches and contrivances abound, making it harder to enjoy when characters say something so gaspingly silly that you have to wonder, wait, did the foreigner just explain his nickname by saying, "Because I'm not from around"? Kraven the Hunter is not, in other words, as mediocre or watchable as the average entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Instead, Sony's latest Spidey yarn is a charmless stinker that's only well-polished enough to make you resent the stench. What can be gathered is that Sergei Kravanov's Levi Miller as a teenager, Aaron Taylor Johnson as the adult anti-hero alter ego Kraven, hunting-obsessed father Nikolai, Russell Crowe, is heartless, asserting that he and his half-brother Dimitri's, Billy Barrett as a young child, Fred Hechinger in the present day, mom took her life because she was mentally ill. It had nothing to do with him being a ruthless monster. Nikolai doesn't want his boys to grow up weak or let America make them soft, so he instills hunting into them, proclaiming that one becomes a legend from killing notable beasts. Dimitri doesn't exactly approve of this, but he is a pushover with loyalty to his father, even if he struggles to live up to such vile masculinity. Meanwhile, Sergei questions the fairness of using firearms while expressing an objection to the poaching period. This probably makes Kraven the Hunter sound on the right track to tensely exploring toxic family dynamics and perhaps the general consequences of hunting animals for sport. Still, it's also shockingly quick to do away with those themes in favor of several other subplots overstuffed with ability-enhanced characters. One doesn't expect realism in a story about a boy mauled by a lion who is then discovered and given a magic potion by Ariana DeBose's mystical Calypso, which not only miraculously heals his inner wounds, but gives him animalistic traits, including the ability to cat-like scale walls as if it's all a parkour performance. But it's reasonable to expect something to engage with and care about among the absurdity. There have been 3 whole, deeply average Venom movies without so much as a sniff of New York's friendly neighborhood wall crawler. Jared Leto managed to completely suck the life out of rooms both on and off screen during the putrid events of Morbius without even glimpsing Peter Parker's crime-fighting alter ego swinging through the skyscrapers in his peripheral vision. And Madame Web was too busy delivering cryptic monologues about fate to fit our hero into her already sagging narrative net. Perhaps this is just Sony turning the anticipation dial up to 11 and leaving it there while we all sit through another dozen half-arsed supervillain spin-offs, like lost souls trapped in the comic book movie equivalent of Dante's Purgatorio. Or maybe Marvel and Sony have made some Faustian Hollywood pact that allows the former to keep making perfectly serviceable collaborative Spider-Man movies and Peter Parker-infused Avengers flicks, as long as the latter continues to deliver a cinematic party where the host never shows up and the DJ only plays ads for Spotify Premium. Perhaps Sony has been trying and failing to feature Spidey for years, but keeps accidentally dropping him in the wrong universe. Is he currently starring with the Hotel Transylvania gang somewhere on Earth 199999? Either way, this week sees the release in cinemas of Kraven the Hunter, about the villainous big game poacher known mostly for his enmity towards Parker in the comics. It's probably the last chance for one of these films to connect with audiences, since Sony has no public plans to continue the series now that Tom Hardy's Venom appears to have reached the end of his slimy, tongue-waggling fever dream of a cinematic journey. And it's probably the last opportunity for Sony to bring Spider-Man to the party proper. Asked whether he felt Kraven the Hunter should fight Spidey in a future installment, star Aaron Taylor Johnson said this week that he felt his character should go toe-to-toe with some superheroes that we know, which is pretty much what all fans have been saying since the beginning of this thing. The correct answer, of course, would just have been yes. While Kraven the Hunter is mildly interesting in his own right, he becomes 1,000 times more intriguing as an obsessive, unrelenting foil for the masked webhead himself. In the comics, Sergei Kravenov is a tragic figure, equal parts hunter and haunted, driven by pride and obsession. His greatest story, 1987's Kraven's Last Hunt, is a spiky, brooding tale of mortality and madness. If Sony taps into that psychological depth, Kraven could transcend his status as a fur-clad meme generator. But even if this one does emerge as a surprise, late-in-the-day superior entry, there will always be the nagging feeling that this entire venture is the equivalent of booking Ringo to play a one-man show on the bongos, when everyone really just wants the Beatles. There is little to suggest that Sony is planning to give fans what they really want this time out. Someone wise once wrote that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Sony has been frustratingly coy about Spider-Man's presence in this universe. It's as if he were a secret menu item at a fast food chain that's only available at 3 a.m. during a lunar eclipse in the third fiscal quarter of a leap year, provided, of course, that the hopeful purchaser makes sure to whisper, "with great power," to the cashier. While the multiversal shenanigans of No Way Home and Across the Spider-Verse have left the door wide open, we're still waiting for you-know-who to walk through it. Theoretically, there are at least 2 Peter Parkers, those played by Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, and 1 Miles Morales, who are not currently being used by the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and might easily start turning up in Sony's sandpit without diminishing the chances of Tom Holland's version continuing to work his magic on Earth 616. Isn't that the whole point of the multiverse, that we can all have our superhero cake and eat it? The brilliance of No Way Home was that it combined the ultimate in Spidey fan service with a pleasingly nutty and epic roller coaster ride. Sony should have realized then and there that this was its one true path forward, and used the film as its jumping-off point for future episodes. Apart from anything else, a spin-off based on the continuing journey of Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin would have benefited from 20 times the hype of Morbius. A cinematic train wreck so bad it was memed back into multiplexes only to bomb all over again. Instead, we're being handed yet another Spider-Man universe movie without Spider-Man. It's as if Kraven were prowling through tropical forests in search of completely absent prey on a strange planet where only plant life exists. You can dress it up with as many fur coats and jungle-themed set pieces as you like, but at the end of the day, it's just a guy yelling at trees. The MCU movies, except Cap, had a sort of baseline that, while not exactly spelled out, was communicated well enough through the action that we understood he had limits and was vulnerable. Kraven is basically indestructible, and at no point does he seem vulnerable until almost the very end. And that's through a Deus Ex Machina in some tension. There are no stakes to the action in Kraven the Hunter, and the weird special effects and filming techniques used to shoot Kraven in action complement that, because he always looks like a walking or crawling cartoon. Not that there would be much to care about anyway, because Kraven the Hunter fails to make any of the characters human likable or understandable. Kraven loves his brother, which is fine, but you never get a sense of how they relate to each other. Every scene they share is full of rote-stilted dialogue where each tells the other what he's feeling or how to feel or what to think. The same is true of Kraven, and Callisto Ham looks up Hassan Adult and enlists Hassan Ali in his targeted assassination scheme. It's unclear what these two are supposed to be to each other in the movie, and despite their meeting as children, they don't seem to care about each other until the plot demands they do to whatever degree. In fact, the plotting is so bad that it's hard to understand what anyone cares about. Why is Kraven killing off gangsters? Your guess is as good as mine. I think he's mad at his father, so he's killing people who are like his father without actually targeting his father, which is pretty dumb, but at best. I can figure why does the Rhino hate Nikolai, because years ago Nikolai wouldn't do business with him, and despite that, Rhino now seems to be doing quite well for himself. He's still pissed off. A decade or so later, riveting stuff, made all the more so when plots and even major characters are simply dropped, disappearing from the movies. Or it'll look complex and twisty. None of these flimsy plot lines or characters are propped up by the acting. Aaron Taylor Johnson never gives Kraven any depth or displays much emotion. He's just there to do some acting on scenes and deliver whatever lousy dialogue. He's given Ariana DeBose almost as bad as the cast of Madame Web, delivering each line with all the emotion of a child playing Peter Pan on the playground. Fred Hechinger, one of the evil twin emperors in Gladiator 2, is weepy and whiny as Kraven's brother. Dimitri, who functions more as a MacGuffin than a character. Alessandro Nia is a walking joke as the Rhino, acting goofy and never feeling like an actual threat, ruining yet another potentially cool comic book villain. The one bright spot is Russell Crowe, who is seemingly the only cast member who's actually putting forth effort. Though I can't really blame the rest for taking it easy on this one. He has some decent lines, and since he's the only one who does, I wonder if it's Crowe's conviction and delivery that sell them more than the writing. Unsurprisingly, Kraven the Hunter wastes a great actor like Crowe in a relatively small role, but he's much better here than he was in Thor: Love and Thunder. Besides Russell Crowe, the bright spots in Kraven the Hunter are few and far between. It makes middling use of its AR rating, with most of the violins still feeling fairly sanitized. But Kraven does have some good kills, particularly in a forest-set action sequence towards the end. Unfortunately, these are undermined by the editing, which keeps the hits coming so fast that you can barely keep track of them. A couple of quick moments where Kraven interacts with animals were interesting, and there should have been much more of this. It's hard to know what's going on because they're glossed over. There are a few Easter eggs as well, some of which work better than others. One is so on the nose, it reminds you of what this series of films should have been. But in the end, there isn't much to praise in Kraven the Hunter, and there's nothing that would make me recommend you see the movie. Even Russell Crowe, other information about this film. I don't like Kraven the Hunter. No, I'm not talking about Sony's latest Marvel spin-off, or the film's main character that Aaron Taylor Johnson plays all in due time. I'm talking about the original character from Marvel Comics. While not the worst foe in Spider-Man's prestigious rogues gallery, Kraven is also far from the best you've seen. Character like him 1,000 times before, an aloof hunter who has grown tired of hunting regular prey, so he decides to go full most dangerous game and hunt Spider-Man of all people. Some would argue that making a Kraven movie without Spider-Man is as silly as making a movie without Spider-Man. But that's the world we live still. I'd argue that the former is a tired concept with or without our favorite web-slinger. I'd personally much rather see Spidey face an interesting villain like the dangerously deranged Green Goblin or the brilliantly maniacal Dr. Octopus, instead of some one-note Russian guy who hunts things for the sake of it. That's not the only reason Sony's latest and possibly final attempt to craft a Spider-Man villain spin-off without Spider-Man. Kraven the Hunter is fighting an uphill battle. While Kraven is a bit more of a recognizable character than Morbius and Madame Web, he's still a far cry from the massively popular Venom. Not to mention, just mere hours before my screening of Kraven the Hunter, reports began circulating that Sony is allegedly pulling the plug on their Spidey villain spin-offs altogether. After Kraven the Hunter, it's abundantly clear as to why. That is, as this is yet another Spider-Man villain spin-off that is narratively empty, technically baffling, and above all else, fundamentally misinterpreting the characters it's adapting. Kraven the Hunter follows the epic hunt of Sergei Kravenov, who begins the story as a young man living in the shadow of his abusive father Nikolai. Russell Crowe, after a tragic hunting accident, leaves Sergei mauled by a ferocious lion. He is suddenly given superhuman senses, agility, and strength. He's also given a more noble purpose of protecting nature from criminals and poachers. And soon his vigilante ways catch the attention of a fearsome villain known as the Rhino Alessandro Nila. Even after I've solidified myself as part of the anti-Kraven fan club, I can safely tell you that this is not a comic-accurate representation of the title character, where the comic book character is known for being a selfish trophy killer. This version tries to make him a noble animal lover. Taylor Johnson's interpretation honestly has more in common with Tarzan than the Marvel villain still. Just because something isn't accurate to the comics doesn't make it automatically bad, does. The film's version of Kraven at least work on his own merits well. While Taylor Johnson does put his action chops on display, Kraven as a character isn't terribly interesting. His dynamic with his estranged father and beloved half-brother Fred Hechinger is practically thrown out the window when the film reveals Kraven is still around his family pretty often. The supporting cast isn't much better. An Academy Award winner Ariana DeBose as Calypso, coming out with the worst of it, acclaimed actors. Phoning things in for a paycheck is nothing new for the superhero genre. Still, it's disappointing to see Dios, who gave an impassioned performance in West Side Story, relegated to some incredibly stiff line deliveries as a barely developed character. It's not very clear why Kraven needs Calypso's help, since he's supposed to be the world's greatest hunter in the comics. Calypso is a magical sorceress, but here she's just a lawyer who happens to have a potion on her once or twice. Then there's Alessandro Nia as Ite, just be the most over-the-top villain in a Marvel movie since Colin Farrell as Bullseye in Daredevil. Much like the majestic mammal he's named after Graz's grass on the Savannah, Nila is gleefully chewing up the scenery every time he appears on screen, with him constantly going off on bizarre, charismatic, downright hysterical moment when Nia, completely unprompted, makes what I can only describe as a sound which probably sounds incredibly vague, but I genuinely don't know how to describe it beyond that. I don't think I can call the character or the performance good, but I will say that Nia's performance as Rhino does bring some much-needed entertainment value, whether it's ironic or not. There's also another villain in the film, with Christopher Abbott's the foreigner, who is just all sorts of bizarre. Not only is this character just an odd choice to include, seriously, dozens of Spider-Man villains to choose from, and this is who you went with. But they also have a superpower that practically makes them an overpowered, unbeatable god, without any real explanation. If you're not decently familiar with the comics character, who is somehow more obscure than Big Wheel, you'll be completely lost as to who this person is and how his powers work. In fact, basically none of the superpowered characters of Kraven the Hunter ever get definitive answers to their out-of-nowhere abilities. Why does Kraven have the loose ability to talk to animals? Some potion did it. Why does Rhino turn into a rhino? Some off-screen doctor did it. Why does that one secret character have the ability to control time itself? It is anybody's guess, which gives you an idea of how barely decipherable Kraven. The Hunter's plot is by far the most apparent issue in Kraven. The Hunter is how blindingly apparent the movie's delays and reshoot were. You thought Fant for Stick had some continuity errors, or that Joss Whedon's Justice League wasn't consistent with the original Vision Kraven. The Hunter might just be the new champion of an inconsistent blockbuster, as not even Spidey's webs can patch up a film edit that is falling apart at the seams. Kraven the Hunter is a representation of everything that's wrong with the term "we'll fix it" in post-production. A good percentage of the movie is character interactions on a green screen, or ADR for off-screen dialogue at least. It's mostly off-screen, but sometimes we get treated to some of the worst dubbing I've ever seen in a major motion picture. I swear there was a moment or two where I could see the green hue of the green screen because it wasn't keyed properly. I suspect the constant tweaking of the film is also why Kraven the Hunter's much-publicized R rating feels like it was an afterthought. The majority of the film's few F-bombs come from off-screen ADR, and the blood and gore effects are third act that turns up the violence. I'd be very surprised if Kraven the Hunter was made with an R rating in mind from The start, speaking of CGI, just about every digital effect in Kraven. The Hunter is laughably unconvincing. All the animals look like cartoon characters, and the non-real animals don't. Fare much better, even something as conceptually simple as gunshot wounds looks so incredibly fake that a mere tiny prosthetic would probably have been a better creative choice. It's been said before, and I'll say it again. Who are these movies, even for Spider-Man fans? Won't like Kraven the Hunter because the film is almost completely detached from the comic books. Casual film fans won't like it either because, on a fundamental filmmaking level, Kraven the Hunter makes some elephant-sized missteps despite directly setting up a sequel. Kraven the Hunter doesn't even feature a single end credit scene, even though the scene from the trailer where Kraven is in a forest with his classic costume was almost certainly what the end credit scene was supposed to be, as it isn't in the film. That alone seems like a pretty clear indication that the shop is starting to close up with a whopping 5 poorly critically received movies in a row. Kraven the Hunter really should have been the last attempt to right the ship. Instead, the film repeats the exact same mistakes that have been pointed out over and over again since the first Venom film. It's almost like a worst hits compilation of all those movies' mistakes. With the poorly conceived idea of Venom, the barely coherent story of Morbius, and the baffling technical problems of Madame Web. This might sound like a dogpile on Sony, and while I do think this spin-off series was a poorly developed concept, the reputable production company still deserves a lot of credit for their positive contributions to the genre. The Spider-Verse films alone are evidence that they can produce quality content, if not also movies that Marvel Studios would never have made. Not to mention the future of the Spider-Man IP is looking bright with Spider-Man Beyond the Spider-Verse, Tom Holland's Spider-Man 4, and the Spider-Man Noir series, which, if that earlier report is to be believed, is what the company will be putting their focus into. From now, only time will tell. But Sony and the creative team behind these films seem to be taking the feedback in stride to make something constructive. And that's what the primary goal of criticism should be, constructive change. Do I wish Kraven the Hunter was a much better superhero movie, of course. But the seeming evidence that the film's flaws are so apparent that it will lead to better films in the future is worth noting. Some years and a few premature notices have passed since Kraven the Hunter was first announced as Sony's next Spider-Man adjacent spin-off, the overstuffed and undercooked Maxi. Production now joins 2 other DOA Spidey satellite picks, Madame Web and Venom the Last Dance, neither of which performed well enough to warrant this much self-serious exposition and ham-handed effing everybody in Kraven the Hunter is clearly trying, as director J.C. Chandor tried to establish in his heartfelt introduction to last night's New York premiere. There's still nothing on screen that suggests a clear understanding of the characters or why their stories had to be told, other than the usual mindless urge to mine every last scrap of Marvel Comics intellectual property. Everything feels simultaneously lifeless and desperate to please, from the computer-generated safari animals to the elaborate wirework and 4-letter swears, but nothing has the spark of antic joy that you might want from a comic book movie about a shredded Russian assassin who has daddy issues and also fights colorful villains with names like the Rhino and the Foreigner. Sometimes the movie is committed, but aimless cast members tell jokes. Nothing really sticks here. Kraven the Hunter begins on a long icy road to jail. The prisoners are let off the bus for 5 minutes to relieve themselves. A guard waddles after our anti-hero Sergei the Hunter Kravinoff, Aaron Taylor Johnson, who makes his grand entrance while urinating. At least it looks like Sergei's peeing, even if the guard's dialogue suggests that he's actually looking around, hoping to escape Sergei. Won't get far, we're told, because there are big, bland, computer-animated wolves loping about. He meets and dispatches those wolves right after he breaks out of prison, much like the legendary but unaffiliated Puma Man Taylor Johnson flies over rooftops and scales walls without grace or style. He takes his shirt off on a helicopter that flies him away to the next setup, then quips robotically to his getaway driver when she asks him how things went in jail. How they always go. Taylor Johnson crows, "Good. For me, bad for them." You can't stay mad at Taylor Johnson for long. even if he does have the bum task of carrying the movie whilst delivering reams of articulate but unlovable dialogue like hunting people down is sort of my thing. Some superpowered villains, led by the heavily accented Eeg, Maniac Alex the Rhino Alessandro Nia, and the squirrely unnamed assassin the Foreigner, Christopher Abbott, pursue Kravenov. He doesn't get far, nor does he appear to be in a hurry, given his faith in his animal-style superpowers, which were gifted to him as a youth by his future girlfriend Calypso Ariana DeBose during a safari hunt. With his overbearing big game hunter father Nikolai Russell Crowe, Sergei also has a fawning brother Dmitri Fred Hechinger, who only pops up when Sergei's story needs some stakes or a basic sense of urgency. These characters usually tell us at length what they care about, followed by some monotonous, by the numbers computer-animated set pieces that show off everyone's superpowers. The Foreigner can hypnotize and then gun down his opponent. Sivik has a weird medical condition that gives him rhino skin. Calypso has a voodoo-loving grandma at Setter who is this R-rated 127-minute-long SLO made for obligatory quips, unusually long takes, joyless profanity, and unconvincing bloodletting don't do much to set the tone, possibly because the rest of the movie isn't sensibly designed for anyone. But pre-old comic book movie, fanboys Neela outshines the rest simply by committing to overblown character actor. Tix Crow also seems to understand his assignment. Both men seem to hail from a different movie than the one Taylor Johnson is acting in. He stalks two armed heavies up a staircase, ducking behind them like harpo marks when they inevitably turn to check what's over their shoulders. It's Sergei. He then drops on all fours to assert dominance, like Sharon Stone in Catwoman. This is soon after Kraven bites off another heavy's nose and then spits it out at another baddie in a hail of tacky-looking computer graphics. At least Batman Returns made a similarly jarring effect, worth gasping at for better and mostly worse Kraven. The Hunter definitely feels like one of Sony's Marvel movies, given the otherwise numbing wealth of dramatic shorthand you'll spot and maybe even cling to eccentric grace notes and flourishes throughout. Hacky cliches and contrivances abound, making it harder to enjoy when characters say something so gaspingly silly that you have to wonder, wait, did the Foreigner just explain his nickname by saying, because I'm not from around Kraven? The Hunter is not, in other words, as mediocre or watchable as the average entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Instead, Sony's latest Spidey yarn is a charmless stinker that's only well polished enough to make you resent the stench. More detailed reviews have thus far been unsurprisingly unkind to Kraven the Hunter. The latest and final entry in Sony's sort of Spider-Man universe. I haven't even bothered with Madam Web yet, but I'll maybe check it out for sheer curiosity. Someday I'm watching Venom: The Last Dance tonight, and we'll review that in the next few days. But I don't think anyone will be too upset to see the end of Sony's failed universe. I usually try to put a positive spin on any movie I watch, as I know making any film is never easy, but you also have to be honest at the same time. Although I didn't hate Kraven the Hunter, I do think that the reviews this time were accurate. I was actually surprised at how some of Kraven was as bad as it was, especially in terms of the dialogue at one point. Character says, after that trip, my grandmother died and I never saw her again. Yes, that's usually how death works. Did AI write this? I'm not sure what Alessandro Nia was trying to achieve as the Rhino, but at times he was hilariously over the top, especially with that silent scream moment, or whatever the hell that was. The CG Rhino at the end wasn't the greatest either, and this looks and feels like a movie that should have come out 15 to 20 years ago. I did like Aaron Taylor Johnson, and I think if he does ever get the Bond gig, he will be good at it. But this really wasn't the best example of his talents. He does the best with what he's given and is totally jacked Russell Crowe. Even with a dodgy accent is always good value and is never less than magnetic. Anytime he is on screen, the film is a tale of fathers and sons, with Crowe playing a crime lord called Nikolai Kravov, who wants his son Sergei Johnson to take over from him. Someday he sees his other son Dmitri Fred Hechinger as weak and generally treats him like dirt on his shoe after a lion attack. Sergei decides he's had enough of his dad and disappears to become Kraven the Hunter. This isn't really anything like the comic character who is a major Spider-Man villain, and we don't see him in the proper costume until the final scene of the movie. We did get to see characters like the foreigner chameleon and Calypso, which fans may or may not enjoy on the action front. Although there is a bunch of CG, there are still plenty of brutal R-rated moments, with the highlight being when Kraven goes all first blood on a group of goons in the woods at one point, throwing a bear trap at one dude's face. There are some decent kills and stunt work too, especially the car chase, which was awesome overall. Kraven the Hunter is hardly a disappointment, as I had little to no expectations, but despite its flaws, it does have some entertaining action scenes, and Aaron Taylor Johnson is a beast in it. Russell Crowe also shines as the scenery-chewing gangster. But you can wait for streaming to see this entries into the so-called Sony Spider-Man universe continue to disappoint. Even the best of these has not been very good, and Kraven the Hunter is far from the best. It's not the worst either, though for those looking for silver linings, some of the fight scenes are nicely choreographed, suitably brutal, and cleanly photographed. Unfortunately, these are window dressing for a plot-by-number storyline that is so comic book generic that pretty much any superpowered individual could be substituted for the title character without having to change much, if any, of the story, considering director J.C. Chandor's filmography, which includes Margin Call and A Most Violent Year. There was reason to hope that Kraven the Hunter might break the lackluster streak of movies made featuring Spider-Man. Villains and side characters. Alas, the banality of the screenplay proved to be too much of an obstacle for Chandor to overcome, despite the R rating denied by the studio for Venom and Morbius, which allows for copious bloodletting and a few scenes of graphic violence. The production fails to gain much traction. Like the rest of the non-S Spider-Man Sony movies, Kraven the Hunter feels orphaned. This character has always been perceived as one of the web crawler's A-list enemies. Sam Raimi had planned to feature him in his unproduced Spider-Man 4, and he was an unused contingency villain for the third Tom Holland MCU film. The lack of a Spider-Man appearance creates a sense that something is missing. It remains a mystery how Sony could produce so many movies about Spidey villains without ever figuring out a way to get at least one of them into a battle with him. Kraven the Hunter begins with a bravura sequence that introduces Sergei Karavanov, a.k.a. Kraven Aaron Taylor Johnson, as he infiltrates an isolated Russian prison and assassinates a prominent inmate. After that, the filmmakers take us into flashback territory, with the movie backtracking to provide Kraven's origin. Story, we learn that Sergei, played as a teenager by Levi Miller, is the prized son of Tucson crime lord Nikolai Kravenov, Russell Crowe, and he has a half-brother, Dmitri, played by an adult by Fred Hechinger. While on safari, Sergei is mauled by a lion and dragged off into the bush. He is eventually left for dead. His dying body is found by a young voodoo priest, who gives him a potion that not only allows him to recover from his wounds, but provides him with super strength, super speed, and near invulnerability. He breaks with his father, leaves Dmitri behind, and goes off to kill bad guys years later. Manages to track down the girl who saved him. Calypso Ariana DeBose is now a successful lawyer based in London. It doesn't take much convincing for her to agree to join Kraven on his one-man tour. Of vigilante justice, one of his next targets is Alexei Sivik Alessandro Nila, but he is no ordinary villain thanks to a series of injections developed by an American scientist. Alexei has developed the ability to harden his skin and grow a horn traits that have earned him the nickname of the Rhino. He also has an associate, the foreigner, Christopher Abbott, who can bend time. These two band together to learn Kraven's identity and use his weakness, his affection for Dmitri, against him. One of the few bright spots in Kraven the Hunter is Aaron Taylor Johnson, whose ability to get physical is enhanced by the ease with which he can bite off a one-liner. He's currently rumored to be in the running as the next James Bond. And based on his work here, he might be an apt choice. Russell Crowe, who brings intensity to practically every role he plays, is suitably unpleasant. Unfortunately, Ariana DeBose is miscast, although perhaps it's simply that the character is badly underwritten. Calypso's sole purpose seems to be to repeatedly save Kraven from death, and Alessandro Nia lacks the quiet menace he intends to express. The lack of invention evident throughout Kraven the Hunter marks it as having come into existence for purely commercial reasons. However, after being commissioned when comic book movies were the rage, it has reached theaters long past its sell-by date. The film's lackluster ending posits a sequel, but there is unlikely to be one, leaving Taylor Johnson free to move on to bigger and better things. As for Kraven the Hunter, the advanced word of mouth has oversold its badness instead of being truly awful. It's simply mediocre. Although one could argue that's the last word a comic book movie wants to have applied to it extra information. Aaron Taylor Johnson isn't new to Marvel. Movies having played the MCU's Quicksilver in 2015's Avengers Age of Ultron, but Kraven the Hunter is his first opportunity to lead one, and while he turns in an entertaining performance, the latest installment of Sony's Spider-Man universe never lives up to its potential. Previously, the movies in Sony's Spider-Man universe have been a mixed bag, while Tom Hardy's Venom films have been generally well received and done solidly at the box office. Jared Leto's Morbius and Dakota Johnson's Madam Web bombed in every way. A movie possibly canned for Kraven the Hunter. Director J.C. Chandor took some big swings. The movie is violent enough to earn an R rating, which already puts it at odds with typical superhero fare. Most movies might earn a PG-13 rating for sci-fi violence, but ultimately they remain relatively family-friendly. Kraven the Hunter, however, features some of the most violent kills I've ever seen in a superhero movie, and I've seen every Deadpool movie. But whereas Deadpool's violence is offset by humor, Kraven the Hunter leans into its titular character's brutality with very bloody results. Aaron Taylor Johnson, Russell Crowe, Fred Hechinger, Ariana DeBose, Christopher Abbott, Alessandro Nia, Levi Miller, Chi, Lewis Perry, Billy Barrett, Jessica X, Michael Schaefer, Drawn Castrate, Greg Kachi, Yelander Moore, Feliz Farther, Duran, Fulton Brown, Alex Scarbeck, Rachel Hanshar, I Slav Ship, Siv Morat 7, Robert Ryan. Further, Kraven the Hunter is a truly standalone Marvel movie, issuing any kind of tie-in to other films in Sony's franchise. In an age where superhero movies are tasked with including commercials for the next film in the franchise, Kraven the Hunter is built to exist on its own, which is an undoubtedly admirable endeavor. However, it would have been more admirable if the standalone movie had a stronger script and better character development to go, along with the decently enjoyable action scenes and Taylor Johnson's requisite superhero ABS. Kraven the Hunter has a surprising number of Marvel characters for a movie meant to be a single anti-hero's origin story. There is, of course, Sergei Kravinoff, Taylor Johnson and his little brother Dmitry Smurov, Fred Hechinger, both of whom fear and respect their father, the crime lord Nikolai Karavanov, Russell Crowe. Much of the movie's first act focuses on establishing the relationships between the three Kravinoffs, but it still remains a thinly sketched dynamic steeped in so much unpacked toxic masculinity that it becomes frustratingly trite. Therein lies my biggest frustration with the film. The movie sets itself up to deconstruct the idea that men should only ever be strong, and if they're not predators, they're prey, and therefore weak, which is inherently harmful to men like Dmitry, who don't fit into that paradigm. And while much of Kraven's journey is about becoming a different man than Nikolai, to walk a path of masculinity that's not toxic because it emphasizes empathy, the movie's ending completely undo all of that. It reaffirms the paradigm in ways that, quite frankly, are baffling for these characters. Of course, there's also the problem that because Kraven the Hunter includes so many characters and spends so much time developing them, little is left for Sergei and Dmitry, which may account for their perplexing turns in the end. Not only do we get their origin stories as Kraven and Chameleon respectively, the movie also explores the origin of Rhino, Alessandro, Nia, and Calypso, Ariana DeBose, and even has a scene detailing the backstory of the foreigner, Christopher Abbott. There are so many characters crammed into this movie, and none of them are fully developed. While the action set pieces are entertaining, I get the distinct impression the movie's story was constructed around what the filmmakers thought would make for cool action scenes. The story exists in service of setting up these scenes rather than the action, working to develop the story and characters. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with big superhero action set pieces, but it's obvious Kraven the Hunter wants to be a grounded character film, and this is impossible when it includes action scenes that don't serve the story. The result is a poorly executed superhero movie with very little personality. Beyond Taylor Johnson's charm, sure, Neela is a surprisingly delightful character as Rhino, and Abbott brings some quiet menace to the foreigner. But even they, and Taylor Johnson, can't distract from the shallowness of the story and characters, which seems to be the consequence of the filmmaker is wanting to have their superhero action scene cake and eat it too. It's frustrating, because there is so much potential in Kraven the Hunter, but at every turn it's squandered as such. I can, in good conscience, recommend it, except to those who solely enjoy superhero movies for the action scenes. And particularly if you like bloody and violent R-rated action, I will say that any fans of Taylor Johnson's will be satisfied by just how charming and enjoyable he is. I was surprised by how much chemistry he has with everyone in the film. I simply wanted so much more of that. But if neither of those things sounds appealing, Kraven the Hunter doesn't make a good case for why it's a must-watch Marvel movie. I can confidently say that out of all the movies that exist, Kraven the Hunter is undoubtedly one of them. It's a shame that it is such a bore to sit through, because Sony had the potential to make a great non-Venom Marvel movie. Not only did they allow director J.C. Chandor an inspired pick to make an R-rated film, but it also contained the most star-studded distribution of any Sony Marvel picture to date. Aaron Taylor Johnson is undoubtedly a great pick to bring Sergei Kraven off Kraven the Hunter to life, and the additions of Russell Crowe, Fred Hechinger, Christopher Abbott, Ariana DeBose, and Alessandro Nia are all excellent, each bringing a distinct, singular talent to the roles they are tasked to play. And yet, with all of this incredible talent in the camera, you can count on Sony's, specifically Avi Arad's, micromanagement to remove Chandor's initial vision and turn it into a pure, torturous nightmare to sit through. Sure, a Spider-Man L origin story on Kraven may not be the best movie idea in the world, but there's enough material to make this film semi-interesting, and it doesn't start half bad either. We meet Kraven already super-powered, exacting one hell of a killing spree inside a Russian prison. This 8-minute opening scene was dropped online last week to muster up excitement on the movie. Sony's G to Sony. The violence is tactile and effective, plus Taylor Johnson's imposing physique makes him a rather formidable person to watch, beating all of these people up and killing them with one improvised weapon after the next. It's decidedly R-rated, which is a good thing, but we slowly start to see the cracks in its structure, from inexplicably baffling cuts to a poorly rendered CGI wolf attacking Kraven during a total weed-out. Things aren't starting to look very good after this cold open Chandor. And screenwriters with a flashback set 16 years earlier in the wake of her mother's suicide. Sergei's father, Nikolai, played by Russell Crowe in his terrible accent era, takes him and his brother Dmitri Fred Hechinger big game hunting. This is fine and all until Chandor and editor Chris Leanan and Craig would cut to a scene featuring a young Calypso, Ariana DeBose, being explained the power of the tarot cards she holds in her hands. We quickly begin to notice glaring ADR overdubbing, overstuffed exposition, and unnaturally stilted dialogues coming to light, illustrating how a Sony Marvel movie changes at almost every turn, and may not be what Chandor initially filmed. Bad ADR occurs in this 2-hour-long film several times, with Deza's Calypso being its biggest culprit. Her lips don't move yet. We hear her characters spew the biggest nonsense of the entire movie, nonchalantly delivered a la Tahar Rahi. In Madame Web, thank God he had a Caesar-worthy career, best performance in Grand Corps Malade and Medi Rs Miss Osor to salvage this embarrassing moment in his Hollywood stint. And it's a shame that Dee's post-Oscar career has been marred by a series of terrible movies with Wish, RG, and now Kraven added to a once promising resume that has unfortunately wasted her talents. It's even worse when the actor seems to belong in a completely different movie. Taylor Johnson seems more attuned to what Chandor wants to depict on screen, especially when he attempts to explore Sergei's animalistic side through spiritually charged images shot with surprising panache by cinematographer Ben Davis, who has worked on several Marvel pictures, including Clochau's Eternals. This makes it unsurprising when Sergei's first human kill is poetically captured Ed with the camera observing him behind large grass, as if an animal stalking its prey before making a move. and several well-shot and composed action sequences could make this offering potentially tantalizing with a better, less meandering screenplay than the one we have. The crux of Kraven, the Hunter central conflict, is about the titular character's rivalry with his father, who has pissed off mercenary Alexei Sivik, played by Alessandro Nia, who, as silly as he can get, is no Paul Giamatti in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and looks to bring his criminal empire down. He does so by kidnapping Dmitri and hiring an assassin simply known as the Foreigner, Christopher Abbott, to track Sergei down. Abbott's Foreigner is the most interesting antagonist, with Chandor clearly having fun capturing a more noir-inspired aesthetic whenever he's on screen. His powers are slightly silly, but are terrifically visualized. It's a shame that his narrative arc goes nowhere, and the same can be said for Dmitri, whose chameleon acts as a tease for future installments that will never materialize beyond what we have seen, including the garish Reed Richards modifying his face in Fant 4 stick as visual effects on display as long as the movie is 127 minutes, the longest of any SSU picture. None of the characters are adequately developed or explored. Calypso is the worst possible offender D's add or doesn't help, but the character does nothing. Nothing but stand in the middle of an action scene, and yet off the screen, as soon as it's over, never to be seen again. The father-son relationship should theoretically be what Kraven the Hunter devotes most of its attention to. However, the film is far too busy, attempting to coalesce one parallel storyline after the next, without caring much about its central character. In the first place, Taylor Johnson is decent, and so are most of the actors who are forced to tiptoe around shoddy material. And to its credit, the R-rated action is quite effective, a Rambo-light set-piece set. Hyperviolet given by Kraven Code feels like a breath of fresh air in an era of stale blockbuster entertainment. For once, we can actually see the blood and guts being ripped out of the characters, compared to the murky gray sludge of Sean Levy's Deadpool and Wolverine. And there seems to be thought when it comes to putting Kraven head-to-head with the Rhino. As shoddy as it may feel, the cinematography does at least try to be semi-interesting, especially when Kraven begins to experience a form of epiphany within his transformation. Unfortunately, these moments feel sparse and never fully commit to one idea, or in this case, visual flourish. I will say that as far as Sony's films are concerned, Kraven contains the clearest and most riveting action sequences this franchise has ever seen, which is a good thing after watch in so many CGI blobs fighting at the same time with no discernible differences. Venom: The Last Dance innocent, still there isn't enough hard R action to save a thunderously boring superhero or anti-hero film that's only made for Sony to retain the rights to one of Spider-Man's most famous antagonists before they inevitably go back to Marvel. That's also why Kraven only wears his iconic suit for 30 seconds during its final scene as Ray. Expected in pure Sony fashion, this part shows massive contempt for the audience who has once again bought a ticket to a film made by a studio who has never cared about making a good superhero or supervillain origin story movie in the first place. All they want is to desperately hold on to these characters, hoping that audiences are gullible enough to buy into their shared universe. The Venom movies were successful because of Tom Hardy's ineffable chemistry with his symbiotic buddy. None of the other Sony movies achieved success because they had tempted to take themselves far too seriously, without ever caring about the characters they depicted on screen. That's why Morbius failed, that's why Madame Web failed, that is also why Kraven the Hunter will fail, and deservedly so. This film, directed by J.C. Chandor, screenplay by Richard Wenk, art Markham, Matt Holloway, story by Richard Wenk, produced by Avia Rod, met David Hausholter, starring Aaron Taylor Johnson, Ariana DeBose, Fred Hechinger, Alessandro Nia, Christopher Abbott, Russell Crowe. Cinematography, Ben Davis. Edited by Chris Leanson. Craigwood. Music by Benjamin Wallfish, Egei Galperine, Sasha Galperine. Production companies, Columbia Pictures, Marvel Entertainment, TSG Entertainment 2, Arad Productions, Matt Atomic Productions. Distributed by Sony Pictures. Release date December 13th, 2012. In United States. Running time 127 minutes. Country United States. Language English. budget 110 to 130 million, box office $2 million. So guys, this is the review of Kraven the Hunter movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.